What's that now?
Did I what?
You said pass that on to
No, I worked in healthcare for 37 years.
the dark skies thing.
For this?
I'm
Did you have something?
My locomotive.
You wanted to talk.
It takes 60 hours. And I keep getting
What's that now?
emails from Amtrak. No, Amtrak keeps, about every 3 months I get an email. I want to know if I want to go to engineer school in Delaware for 12 weeks.
Oh, yeah. No, it's because it's on the agenda. There'll be a public hearing during the ordinance, so, yeah, you'll have.
No,
Yeah, no problem.
so I went up for a ride one day.
We never are either.
And just I was volunteered, and I kind of like it, something to do.
So did I.
Getting our attention.
It's working.
Sorry. Good evening. Today is Wednesday, October 9th, 2019. I'd like to call this evening's City Council meeting to order. If we could all please...
Not wrong date.
Oh, my goodness. I questioned that myself. 23rd. Wow. I apologize. Wish it would
We adjourned that one.
Yep. I'd like to call this evening's meeting to order. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We all love cut and paste. Could I have the roll call?
Councilmember Boff.
Here.
Councilmember Stimmel.
Here.
Councilmember Williams.
Present.
Councilmember Strobehn.
Absent and excused?
Councilmember Cerveny.
Here.
Mayor Thornton.
Here. Thank you. Next is the consent agenda. If there are no requests for any items to be removed, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
A second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next on the agenda is citizens' public comment. This is a time allocated for citizens that want to address the city council. If you have anything you'd like to share with us this evening, please step up to the podium, give us your name and address, and if you could limit your comments to 3 minutes. Seeing no one stepping up to the podium, I'll close public comment and we'll continue moving on. So next are council and staff reports. I do have a couple things that I want to share with the council this evening. First of all, I just want to acknowledge both our Public Works Department and our Wastewater Treatment Department for really doing a great service to the city this past weekend. Friday night we had some pretty bad weather. I just have to read my note here. It was Pump Station 2 at about 3:45 on Saturday morning, I believe, failed. It alarmed. Fortunately, one of the wastewater treatment plant operators caught the alarm. We were able to get to the pump station before it overflowed and was able to lower the volume prior to it spilling over and do it manually. Matt did come to the city shortly after that and worked with the wastewater treatment plant operator. They got it back operating later in the day, so it was a great service there. And then we also had a pretty large tree fall on Pacific Highway the same evening, and Public Works crew, Mr. Pettit was out there bright and early and got it all cleaned up. And it was my wife that noticed it, so I didn't even get a complaint from any of the other residents. My wife let me know that on her way out of town on Saturday morning, we had a tree down, and before I knew it was all cleaned up. So I want to thank both you gentlemen that are here this evening, as well as the rest of the crew, for your great work and service. I also would just like to mention to the council that you all may know, hopefully everyone knows, that we do have a salary commission here in the city. Salary commission is their responsibility is primarily to set the stipend for the city council members, and I was going through a process to fill a couple of vacant positions on that salary commission here recently, and when we got the positions that were vacant filled, the remainder of the people on the salary commission resigned as well. So I ended up appointing 5 new people to that salary commission. The names of the new commissioners will be Mr. Jack Davis, Mr. Dennis Hill, Cheryl Tipton will be on that, Deanna Sutter, and John Jockola. And I just want to bring that to the council's attention. I would like to get your approval if anybody has any objections to that.
None.
So yeah, they will. Janice Fowler, who is one of our accountants here in the city, she will actually be the facilitator with that group. And it's the salary commission operates under a separate ordinance, so council doesn't really get involved with it. But we do have 5 new commissioners assigned to that.
Can someone make a motion approving that?
Make a motion to approve the appointments of the salary commission representatives.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the salary commissioners. I'm just going to give their names again. Mr. Jack Davis, Mr. Dennis Hill, Cheryl Tipton, Deanna Sutter, and John Jockola. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And then I just also want to mention that the 31st of October will be Halloween, so hopefully everybody will be careful and watch out for all the little children walking the streets of the center. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Kearns for the attorney report.
I have very little to report tonight. Update on the land use appeal. FutureWise did file a petition seeking Supreme Court review of the Court of Appeals decision. Our response to that, all the other parties' response to that is November 18th, I believe, and I would assume within a month or 2, the Supreme Court will decide whether to accept or not accept that case. So we're hoping that the Supreme Court doesn't accept it. The Court of Appeals correctly applied the law and ruled in our favor on the annexation issue.
Very good.
That's it.
Any questions? Thank you, Dan. Next are council comments. Councilmember Boff.
Thank you, Mayor. I only have one thing tonight. I just want to commend the Public Works crews, especially the groundskeeping guys. Last couple of days I've had a chance to get out, and the sun's been out for the last 2 days as I've been driving by the parks, and the lawns and the grass is just absolutely beautiful. So it's their hard work is definitely showing, and I think the word of thanks should be passed along to the people who are out there maintaining the parks. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Stimmel.
Nothing tonight, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Williams.
Nothing tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Councilmember Strobehn is absent this evening. Councilmember Cerveny.
I have nothing to report.
Very good, thank you. Next, we have staff reports. First staff report we'll have this evening will be the finance staff report, and Mr. Dustin Bailey will present.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. What I'm going to do in the staff report is actually scroll down to the table, and I'm going to talk through it a bit for you all. This is a budget to actual breakdown of revenues by category, expenditures by department, and I have some notable items for quarter 3. General fund revenues overall are 73% of projections. The sewer fund loan repayment for 2019 was transferred to the general fund in the amount of $265,000. Gambling tax revenues from the card rooms are actually at projections for the year. Retail sales tax revenue are below projections, largely due to delays in construction of the new Center Middle School. And also there's been a slight impact on the sales tax revenues because of the adjustment that I mentioned earlier in the year, that there was a bit of an overpayment 2018, so that is drawing down our revenue for sales tax a bit this year. Gambling tax revenues for pool tabs are lower than estimates, just generally due to decreases in activity in this area. And intergovernmental is a little bit below projections because the city is working to receive reimbursement of some grant funding we hope to have in place before the end of the year. The finance department budget is higher than projections, mostly due to staff changes, which has led to separation payouts, additional consultant support, primarily related to employment issues, and in addition, utilities for the new city hall are being absorbed by finance, so that continues to push up the finance budget a bit. Community development the budget is higher than projections due to higher than expected work volumes, staffing changes, and consultant support. And something we spoke with the council about in the work session earlier is that we're expecting to complete about 100 new homes this year, so that's increased the expenditures needed to support that activity. And it's important to note that much of these increased expenditures are covered by revenues and permits and fees, and that continues to provide a steady stream of revenue for the city. Moving on to the sewer operating fund, I have the sewer enterprise fund there. Revenues from billing are slightly below budget for the sewer operating fund. Other revenue, which includes biosolids, is proving to be a strong revenue source for the city. SDC revenues are up due to new development in the city. And expenses are below budget due to plant efficiencies, effective plant maintenance, and expenditure oversight by our public works manager sitting on the other side of the room here. Overall budget conclusions, the budget appears to be near projections. Staff continue to monitor funding sources to ensure revenues are received as outlined in the budget. The city management team is monitoring the budget closely to ensure taxpayer funds are used in an appropriate and responsible manner. The council will expect to have an amendment for consideration in November to correct some items to address revenues and revisit actual projected expenditures. I also have the stormwater fund here just for reference. We haven't been billing to the stormwater fund because we were waiting for some revenues to be infused into that fund before we started drawing down on it, and you can see we're at $42,627 revenue with zero operating expenses. But we will start billing mostly staff hours to that fund in the next quarter. Moving on to gambling tax revenue, you can see card room revenue continues to show signs of stabilization through the end of the third quarter. And that is my staff report. Are there any questions?
Okay.
Thank you,
Great
Mayor.
report, and thank you. Next, we have a community development report, and Mr. Jeff Swanson will be presenting.
Good evening, Council. Jeff Swanson. I'm your Contract Community Development Manager, and I'm going to give a brief report here. I'll start with our narrative of a few items. So first off, McCase-Bizito, the evaluation of the Community Development Department and business processes is under review, and the final report is expected by the end of this month. There's some additional content that the consultant is adding into the report. Johansson Wing continues to prepare construction documents, and recently we've met with them. This is for the TDS building project. We met with them to talk about interior design specifications, and this is, out of my realm of expertise, but this is sort of the choosing colors and different textures and things on the interior. So we've called in some expert help on that, and And so appreciate those who have put in time on that project. DKS Associates continues to work on the traffic modeling at La Center Road and Paradise Park Road. And in addition, they've been working on the La Center Road, Timmon Road intersection for possible inclusion in the city's 6-year transportation improvement program. And that will come before council. We're presently working through the SEPA process on that. And once that's complete, it can come to the city council. We received input on the Clark County countywide planning policies related to the Cowlitz tribe and adjacent jurisdictions. We submitted some comments back to the county in mid-September, and I actually have some documents here that we can walk through. Let's see, zoom out a little bit there. There we go. So comments that we submitted. Let me zoom out just one more. There we go. So the comments we submitted were here on this first one, 1.12. We asked that they include the term "and relevant jurisdictions" when considering the Cowlitz tribe's growth needs, their future growth needs. We asked that relevant jurisdictions be included, and those are defined as jurisdictions adjacent to and or affected by the Cowlitz Indian Tribe Reservation. So in the second draft review, that comment has been included. Ridgefield submitted a similar comment. We asked that this language in 1.1.13 be struck as redundant language. We further asked that language in 1.1.16, this bullet point, be struck as a redundant point. And then in 1.1.20 is what it's supposed to be, that it read, local jurisdictions will work with the tribe to develop agreements that provide for discussion on comprehensive planning issues among governments. End of statement. And the parties will jointly determine the appropriate contents of agreements and a schedule for completing them. And so that suggested edit has also been implemented. So the second round of comments is here in front of you, and any input that you might have, certainly welcome that either at this time or here in the near future. They're looking to have, I think I put the date in my narrative here, mid-November is when they're looking to have comments back from the jurisdictions on this second round of planning policy comments. And so this will also be considered at the Planning Commission's next meeting here in November. Yeah, Councilmember Boff.
Question for you, sir. The Center UGA, section 1.1.18. It's on page 44 of the PDF. There it is. It says there shall be no net material increase in cardroom capacity within the La Center urban growth area. Does this mean that our current cardrooms could not put another facility out at the junction if they wanted to expand out there?
I believe that's what it means. This 1.1.18 is not a new policy. So this is an existing countywide planning policy. And so the new language that was proposed is the stuff below that. See, there was language in there, an additional 120 acres plus or minus of industrial land, and the county is suggesting that
I want to talk about that too.
Yeah.
But why don't we think about revising this first line here, even though maybe it's been there historically, but what if our cardrooms wanted to put another facility out there? It would be in violation of what this says, would it not?
Yeah, it would not be consistent with this policy.
that's for the urban growth area, though. That would be within the city limits. So I think that this would pertain if
Okay.
that was, this was prior to the city of La Center annexing the La Center Junction.
Okay.
And it was in just our urban growth
Okay,
area.
so we'd be okay then?
You might want to just touch a little bit about the implications of this policy as it pertains to the city of La Center.
Right, and I'm looking at Mr. Cairns a little bit here too, because my understanding of urban growth area is the bigger bucket within which the incorporated limits of a city reside. So, sort of these Russian nesting dolls sort of thing, right?
The donut.
The donut. So, and here's where I'll ask for a legal opinion, but when it says no net material increase in card room capacity within the La Center urban growth area, does that not also include, by implication, the incorporated limits of the city?
I don't believe it does, because the county really doesn't have jurisdiction over planning within the city limits, but there's some history here. This was Betty Sue Morris's idea. It was during early on negotiations with the tribe, and the card rooms were deeply involved in that, and the junction area was not part of the city limits at that time. There had been an economic analysis done that indicated that the card rooms may do better economically if they're located at the junction. And so it does kind of freeze in time. It relates back to the situation that doesn't really currently exist anymore, because the UGA expanded out there and we annexed out to that land. So it's no longer in the urban growth area, it's within the incorporated city limits, and so these policies would apply to areas within the urban growth area, but not within the corporate city limits.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Should we then suggest that the county strike that language from the policies? If it's just an artifactual sort of thing that's propagated into this draft?
we could do that. It doesn't really affect what's left inside the urban growth area that this would possibly affect. It's all the area south of the Center Road.
But that's today's,
Yeah.
today's
Yeah,
situation. What if UGA will grow in future years, hopefully?
I don't know that it's worth waking up this sleeping dog.
This monster.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the county has sort of buried the hatchet with the tribe and has made peace with it in many different ways. At the time, the county was politically very much at odds with the tribe, and anyone who would try to make some sort of business agreement with the tribe. So it was an attempt to kind of put the city in a box. I wouldn't say that the city outmaneuvered the county, but politics have changed at the county, and also the legal landscape has changed by virtue of the city's expansion of its UGA and annexation of all that land. So I don't know if it's worth the effort at this point.
Okay.
And I would imagine a lot of the current planners are also puzzling, and county councilors are puzzling about the genesis of this language.
Yeah.
But I think it was a county resolution at the time that she pushed through. And there might even have been a corresponding city resolution.
Well, there was an overlay that limited the card rooms so they could not expand outside of the current footprint in the
They're-
city limits.
They're stuck with the zone that allows them, you're right.
Right. And the history behind that was simply to not get into competing interests and as we tried to develop more business and economic development in the downtown core, not having any more growth be solely card rooms. And I don't know that the total history behind the language, whether or not that was something that was with the existing council at the time, some sort of meeting of the minds to limit them in terms of how big they could get.
Yeah, I'm trying to recall what the circumstances were where this mattered that much, but the focus was the junction.
Well, I know at the time that the county wasn't really gung-ho at having Las Vegas type signboards at the junction or anywhere in the Discovery Corridor.
Here's the thought.
For that matter. That wasn't what they visioned being the commercial and an industrial growth for the county.
The original agreement that the county struck with the tribe, though, included the tribe agreed to comply with a whole host of county code provisions. The sign code was conspicuously absent from that list at the time. Yeah. So this might have been I don't know. I can see why the county councilors at the time, county commissioners at the time, didn't want exit 16 to be gambling central in Southwest Washington. But, oh well, so much for that. I wish.
A
That's
new reality a
one
couple decades later.
You might ask them, what does this mean?
Okay.
And so you're fairly comfortable then that our card rooms would not be restricted since that area is now within the city limits?
This would apply inside the UGA, because that's what we oftentimes refer to as the dual interest area. So they're either subject to an interlocal agreement that governs land use planning, but technically they are under county land use planning control, absent some agreement to the contrary. Within the city limits, county zoning doesn't apply.
Yeah.
I mean, for the same reason that we won at the Court of Appeals.
Exactly.
The land once annexed is beyond county regulatory authority.
Okay. Okay. Second half of that is the following line that's being proposed to be removed. An additional 120 plus or minus acres of industrial land shall, not may or should, shall be added. And I think that was disregarded. Or are we yet to look forward to another 120 acres going into our UGA?
That's a good question. Again, the genesis of this, I'm not entirely certain where the language came from. It probably dates back to the period of time that Mr. Cairns is referring to with Commissioner Morris. And so, the realities of expanding our urban growth boundary in this jurisdiction are very challenging because of the resource lands and the East Fork bottoms that we're hemmed in by.
It just concerns me that this, to date anyway, has been disregarded. And I have a problem with deleting it.
Well, it came about which cycle? When we lost
04,
what?
maybe? Was it 07?
It was 2 cycles ago, I believe, and it was still, the tribe, of course, hadn't been received federal acknowledgement or
Trust
approval to
designation.
game or the trust status for the land or the initial reservation declaration. But I think the notion was, if that happens, it'll carve a big chunk out of the expansion, UGA expansion that the city was requesting at the time and had been approved. That appealed to the growth board, eliminated everything but the blob at the junction from the UGA expansion that the county approved at that time. So this was, I think we were seeking like 600 some odd acres, a lot of it beyond on the other side of the freeway. And the notion was that if a lot of that is taken away from the city and its urban growth expectations because it went into trust, that the county would give us some substitute. Well, all of that was thrown out by the growth board, except for the 53 acres.
And is that because the land under consideration was zoned resource land?
Right, that was the basis for the growth board rejecting it. It was resource land, and the de-designation of that land was not justified, and the expansion of the city's urban growth area was also not sufficiently justified.
So it's the growth board is the major factor of that,
Right.
and not the county.
County tried, but this is no longer relevant because of that growth board decision.
Okay.
The county kind of has a track record of unsuccessfully de-designating agricultural resource lands for
Yes.
urbanization.
And we've seen that. Okay, thank you.
Other questions about these policies?
Has there been discussion, or is there a need for discussion about how going forward we have those dialogues about fee to trust are issues?
I'm not aware of any discussions
At
going
all?
on at all about that, yeah. At least not with respect to the policies that have been proposed.
We do have an agreement with the tribe that they will not take land into trust or seek to take land into trust on the east side of the freeway.
Between Paradise Park and,
But is this another
299,
opportunity to get that in writing?
It's a county comp plan provision, and the tribe will say, it's not binding on us. We're not subject to county regulation.
the stronger hold that you have on that is the intergovernmental agreement between the city and the tribe.
Which includes a waiver of sovereign immunity should they violate that provision. I wouldn't bet the farm on a county comp plan policy. Just
Let's talk.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, any other questions on that aspect of the report? If not, then I'll give an update here, pull up the map, and just a couple of quick updates. So project number 6, Heritage Center Building B, they are working on the foundation. It's right smack in the middle of town, so it's easy to see what kind of progress they're making on construction there. The critical areas ordinance, which affects all areas of the city, that is set for a city council work session. We're looking at Tuesday, November 19th to conduct a city council work session at 6:30 on the critical areas ordinance, and then it would come before you for a public hearing at the November 20th council meeting. And I think that's a special meeting because it's moved forward 1 week because of the holiday, right?
You're correct, yes.
Yes.
Let's see, other updates here.
Excuse me, you said November 13th, is it,
19th.
19th.
oh, 19th?
19th and 20th.
What time is it, Jeff?
So the work session would be at 6:30 on Tuesday, the 19th. City council meeting on Wednesday, the 20th would be at 6:30.
Okay, thank you.
On minute management, that's project number 8, which doesn't appear on that map, but it's on that one, up at the junction. So we've held the pre-application conference, and I noted on my report that a site plan submission is under engineering review, and as it turns out, we're still waiting for their site plan submission, but they've had questions going back and forth with the engineer prior to their submission. So wanted to note that change. On the Schwartz B&B, that is project number 9. And that one went through a conditional use hearing back in August. And I noted that plans are under review, and we're actually waiting for plan submission there. So they've submitted some stuff, but their submission hasn't been technically complete at this point. Let's see, so Foothill Estates, Gordon Crest 2, that's project 11. The subdivision work there is finished. Houses are being built. Number 12, this is Gordon Crest 1. Subdivision there is also finished. Houses are being built. Heritage Country Estates, that's project 13. All the subdivision work there is completed and houses are under construction. Let's see, number 14, Highland Terrace. We're waiting for their final engineering plans to come in. That's the status on that one, latest and greatest. Let's see. Number 16, which is Kay's Place. One single-family residence has been constructed, but 3 plans have been approved in 2019. So looks like we'll be seeing some construction kickoff there again here pretty soon. On number 17, Riverside Estates, we have 5 plans that have been approved in phase 1, and we're awaiting additional construction plans. And I think that is all the notes. I have, Tony review my report, and he has some additional context and markups that he provides for me. So any questions?
I have one.
Yes, sir.
I'm frequently asked the status of the Stevens Hillside project. I know there was an issue regarding a bridge over a creek and road extensions and so forth that's come up a couple of times in council meetings. Have there been any updates on that?
So we've responded to the applicant in terms of the concerns that they've raised to the city council, and they note that there was some kind of agreement. They claim there was an agreement with the city to construct the road. There's no record of that. We have, we have to go with what the conditions of approval are that the hearings examiner sets forth in his final order. And so we're working from the record that we have in front of us. So I think one of the upcoming projects that we're working on that may have some impact on the economic feasibility of their project is the Timmon Road, La Center Road, including that in the 6-year plan, because right now it's in the 7 to 20 year CFP, and so it's not TIF creditable, but it is a condition of approval on several developments that, in addition to paying the traffic impact fee, that they pay that proportionate share for that 7 to 20 year project. So the strategy is we received $1.5 million for the 4th Street project, so we can lower that cost. We anticipate that the Timmon Road, La Center Road project is going to be about equivalent in cost. And so we believe we can bring that project into the 6-year plan, leave the TIF rate unchanged, and applicants that would like to can come in for a post-decision review and have that condition of approval lifted through a type 2 process. So I don't know if that's going to push the needle enough for Stevens Hillside to make that project work, but it should provide some economic improvement to their project.
And that amendment to the capital facilities plan 6-year funded project list should be coming up in November?
I think so.
Okay.
We're emailing with Ethan Spoo, our contract planner, about the SEPA today.
Yeah.
So
I think November.
Yeah.
Might be up there. So it's kind of the first of the 37 steps you just heard described to you.
there's probably a 38th and 39th I can mention too.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Great report. Okay, next we'll move on to ordinance resolutions and public hearings. This evening we do have one ordinance on the agenda. It's an ordinance amending Title 18. It's the development code of the La Center Municipal Code for outdoor lighting. This has been before the council before. It was actually scheduled for the October 9th meeting. It was rescheduled for action this evening, so we brought it back forward. And I notice we have 3 of our planning commissioners here this evening and the planning commissioner chair, so I appreciate you all being here this evening. I don't really know, as an opening, Jeff, could you just kind of update the council as to where we are with the process, and then turn it over to the council for any discussion that they may have, and then, of course, we'll open up the public hearing.
Sure. So I'll just kind of give a brief legislative recap on this process. And I'll beg for a little bit of leniency here because Mr. Eisman worked with the Planning Commission on this project, and he's unavailable this evening. But this did come before the council earlier in the year. There were some questions and concerns that did not move forward for a lack of a second. The Planning Commission continued to work on this project, met with a couple of council members who had the opportunity to share with them their concerns and work through some of the language. And so what you have before you is a reflection of those adjustments. And so it's presented for your action this evening following a public hearing.
Very good. Yep, thank you. So before I open the public hearing, council, do you have any comments or questions or discussion that we'd like to have prior to? Again, this has been before us a couple of times, and
Yeah. I like what I see and what's in the packet. My concerns, I feel, have been addressed in what's being proposed.
okay. All right. And in the packet is there is a planning commission report, and of course the ordinance and the code itself. So
That ordinance in the recitals recounts the history. So this came up for hearing back in April. And was denied and went back down to the Planning Commission for reworking.
Do you know if Tom had quite a lot to say too, where I know he's not here tonight, but did he have some input with the Planning Commission on this?
He
I think-
did, and
I
I think
think-
the Planning Commission will, I mean, that was the driver when they, in the report, so I think he was the primary carrier of that message.
maybe we'll get some comment on that during the public comment period. But with that, I will let, if there's no other questions or comments by council, I'll open up for public hearing at 7:15. If anyone would like to comment on this ordinance, please step up to the podium. If you would give us your name and address, and then I'll limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Sit it down on the lower level.
Yeah, that's fine. Dinah McLean, Chair of the La Center Planning Commission, and I'm here with Dennis Nutbrock, La Center Planning Commission member, and Commissioner Steve Workman. And today we're holding a public hearing regarding an ordinance amending Title 18 Development Code of the La Center Municipal Code for outdoor lighting. Dennis Nutbrock, Eric Eisman, our consulting planner from ET Land Use Planning Services, and the Plan Commission have been working on the outdoor lighting code since January 2018. Dennis Nutbrock reviewed codes from over 20 cities, IDA, and IES. I spoke with Clark County and other cities within it. Dennis Hill helped research lighting, and much time has been spent crafting an outdoor lighting code that will benefit the city of La Center and its citizens. In the last meeting with the City Council, we heard of several concerns which we have worked to address. We heard that some council members were concerned about the amount of regulation for residential housing. So we have worked to ensure that residential lighting was not over-regulated by applying the code to new single-family residences and multifamily complexes until the time the certificate of occupancy has been issued. The resulting new homeowners and currently existing homeowners are exempt for review. For landscape lighting, we mitigated the council's concerns by allowing for it, along with the guidelines to reduce obtrusive lighting. And then finally, we heard that there was a concern that the review official authority would establish curfews for non-residential uses. So we have set a more general requirement that for non-residential uses, 1 hour after closing of business, lights are dimmed to meet safety, security, and usage needs. And I would like to make a note that on page 6 of the code, in table 18.282-3, residential lighting, the maximum allowed lumens for each accent luminaire for LZ2 should be 1,050 instead of 105. On page 4, item C, at the top of the page, the C2 zoning district needs to be changed to C3 as we don't have a C2. So please approve the updated Title 18 Development Code of the La Center Municipal Code for outdoor lighting with these 2 corrections. Thank you. Oh, and I did speak with Tom, and he did say that he would support this as it was written, so, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else stepping up to the podium, I'll close the public hearing portion of this evening's ordinance and turn it back over to council. I'd just like to recognize again the Planning Commission for all their hard work on this particular ordinance. I know an awful lot of work has gone into it, and as so many of the projects that the Planning Commission has worked on in the past few years. But again, thank you for all your hard work. Council? No other discussion. Could I get a motion?
Mayor, I move to approve Ordinance 2019-20, an ordinance amending Title 18 Development Code of the La Center Municipal Code to add a new Chapter 18.282 Outdoor Lighting and amending Chapter 18.40 definitions to create a new set of standards and development regulations for outdoor lighting.
Second.
Do we need to include the corrections?
Yeah,
with
there's-
the 2?
With the 2 corrections noted.
With corrections as noted.
So are the corrections reflected in the
code.
version on the web?
I don't see an update.
No, they're not.
Okay.
No. Is that good enough?
She did, Dinah did recite them into
The
the record, and they're reflected in the motion. But Dinah, did you have to have like a written version so that we can make sure that the changes get done correctly in the final adopted version?
I can provide a corrected copy.
Perfect.
Does that go to?
Dustin?
It's been moved and seconded to adopt ordinance 2019-20, an ordinance amending Title 18 Development Code of the Center Municipal Code to add a new Chapter 18.282 Outdoor Lighting and amending Chapter 18.40 definitions to create a new set of standards and development regulations for outdoor lighting. I also, again, just want to note that we will be getting some corrected language for the code itself, and that will be incorporated into this ordinance. This is an ordinance, so can I get a roll call?
Councilmember Boff?
Yes.
Councilmember Stimmel?
Yes.
Councilmember Williams?
Yes.
Councilmember Strobehn?
Absent, excused.
Councilmember Cerveny?
Yes.
The ordinance passes unanimously. Thank you, council, and again, thank you for Planning Commission. So, that wasn't so bad, was it? So next on the agenda, under new business, we have Mr. Paul Lewis here this evening. Mr. Lewis is not a stranger to the center. It's good to see you back, Paul. And he'll be doing a council briefing on our permit code and fee structure.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll be with you again. Keeping with the community development theme for your evening tonight, I've got a presentation on a review that we did looking at development permit cost recovery and fees. I've got about 20 slides I want to go through. Quickly hit on the objectives for the project, the approach, and set some context. Walk you through some permit activity trends, looking back several years and then get into the meat of the cost recovery summary. So we'll look at the financial information, and then we'll transition into looking at the fee survey, comparison of your fees to other local jurisdictions, and then close with some observations and recommendations. So first up, just on the objectives and approach, really had two objectives. One was to analyze and compare your planning and building services, revenues, expenses, and cost recovery for effectively the 3 years, 2016 through 2018. We also looked at mid-year 2019 as well. And then to sort of benchmark your planning and building services permit fees to the fees that are charged in other jurisdictions. And we've got some peer jurisdictions that are both in Clark County and also in the Portland metro area. The approach was to get data on the revenues, expenses, and permit activity from city staff, and this was staff primarily in the community development department, but also in finance. And then we capitalized on some work that I've done previously in 2018, collecting fee data from other jurisdictions, and we just piggybacked on that and had your staff complete essentially the same kind of survey information, so we could have your fees for comparison there as well. Quickly to set the context, when you think about land use, the planning side, cost recovery, the targets there are generally below 100%, and that's primarily because there's a lot of public assistance and information involved in that activity. You heard just recently from Jeff that some people have come in and talked to the engineering department before they submit an application, and there's a lot of cost related to just having that expertise available to answer questions before the building permits, before any permit is actually pulled. The building permit side, however, is usually closer to 100% cost recovery, and that's because the project owner is expected to pay 100% of the cost of the review of their specific development. The land use you can think of, there's more public goods, there's other property owner interests in that land use process, and less so with the building permit side. One other piece of context is that the state auditor weighs in on this topic and effectively tells local governments that they can't use permit fees to support other government services. So you can't charge higher fees for, say, a building permit and then use that money to mow the lawns in the parks. They have to be used to pay for the cost of delivering those permit services. And a lot of jurisdictions use separate funds to prove that out. You're not required to, the center does not, but it's one thing if you continue to grow and your land use and building permit activity continues to grow, it might be something to consider. So first up, just a couple of slides on the permit activity. And this goes back to 2013. You can see, can't even fit the numbers in, they're so small in 2013. And you can see the steady growth in the building permit activity through 2019. Originally just looked at 2019 through June 30th, and then found that you had 39 single-family building permits issued in the third quarter, so I thought I'd add those to the mix to help out that graph. But effectively, there's four categories here. The blue bars, the new residential, so the new single-family residences. The green portion of the bar is the mechanical and plumbing, so the trade permits. The pink side is more other. These could be things like roofs, patios, decks, those types of building permits. And then the smaller number at the top is the commercial, and that's no surprise in terms of the center. Not a lot of active commercial building permits over the last 5 or 6 years. But you can see a steady growth, and through September, again, 61 new single-family permits compared to 53 in all of 2018, and 2018 representing a doubling of the permits issued in 2016 and 2017. On the building permit side, one of the things we looked at is the number of days to issue a building permit. So we looked at the application date and then the issuance date, and just calculated the difference between those two, and did that for each of the years that we had data. I didn't do a very good job, but up in the right-hand or left-hand corner there, we didn't have complete data for these dates in the system. And so it just tells you that, for example, for 2019 through September, we had 31 permits in this sample out of the 61 permits that we actually had. I think part of it has to do with the use of Clark County, where they're putting in the same date. that they issue it, the date that it's received. So it's not being logged correctly. This is brought to the attention of staff. But the results for the number that we did have information for were good. Your median time from application to approval is 13 days, so just over 2 weeks of working time. My experience, I've done this kind of work in other jurisdictions, that's a good time frame. Typically in that 2 to 3 week time frame is what the expectation is of the building community. If you start getting out beyond 3 weeks, it can be problematic. Usually there's a reason for that. Your 2019 ranged from 6 days to 42 days. So there was probably 1 or 2 that had additional long times, but the predominant number were right at that 13-day. So I consider this a positive. Looking at the land use side, again, the same kind of trend information. There are generally four types of planning land use permits, type 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they go up in terms of their complexity. So a type 1, an example is like a boundary line adjustment, something fairly simple that can be done at the staff level. Type 2 is a little bit more complex. Critical area review could be a short plat as well, would be a type 2. Type 3 subdivisions are the most typical, require a hearing examiner. And then type 4 would be an annexation or some sort of code change. We don't believe we have complete data on this, partly due to the staff turnover and partly due to because of the systems not necessarily being readily maintained. But I think this is evidence that on the land use side there has been some decrease in the activity over time. The 2018 time period is the one where we're really uncertain in terms of the full data set. But in any event, through June of 2019, things have picked up roughly at the same level they were in 2017 through half of the year. So again, this is usually a leading indicator. So the land use part of the process is the first step. So obviously if you have a subdivision gets developed, then the building permits will come later. Same kind of thing for a commercial development. You have a site plan application. You have an annexation before there's any kind of development. So this is a sort of an early indicator of potential future development activity. So the next series of slides talk about the cost recovery analysis that we do, and I want to start with identifying a couple of the challenges that we faced, both on the revenue and the expense side. And that was that the coding that we had in the financial system wasn't well aligned with the information that we had in the permit system, so we couldn't match those two up very well. A lot of it had to do with the way that you bill for reimbursement, and so there's a category. You may have a developer that gets billed for a land use, engineering, and a building permit all in the same invoice, and it gets coded to one code in your general ledger. So not a lot of ability to break those apart and track them back to their original permits. And you'll see the implications of that in some of the data. On the expense side as well, the personnel costs aren't allocated across programs or functions. Eric Eisman, your contract planner, did in his invoices allocate different costs between his non-applicant related activity and his application activity. We used that data where we could find it, but again, it's not systematic in your accounting system, and so we had to do some additional work. So my last bullet here is the analysis represents our best efforts to estimate those costs and revenues by permit type, but it's likely incomplete and subject to a little bit of a margin of error. So, and that you'll see a recommendation that relates to these items coming up later. So here's the revenue by permit type, and because of those limitations, I lumped together the land use and engineering, but the building permit information I think is fairly reliable as is. And this goes back again 16, 17, 18, and through June of 2019. And this just reflects 22 single family and not the 61 that you actually have through September, the 2019 activity. So those bars in the 2019 column would be significantly higher if we had taken that through June. But you can see a significant increase in 2018 over 2017. It's just under 340,000 in 2018, up roughly 60% over the prior year. If you go back to the building permit activity data, you'll see the same kind of jump in terms of the permit activity, roughly a 60% jump in terms of that overall building permit relating to a same kind of increase in the revenue side. So roughly for a full year, again, looking at 2018, just under 340,000 year-to-date through June of 2019, just under 200,000. So on course to exceed, well exceed the 2018 numbers in 2019. The expense category, and what we did, I've got three categories here. The blue bar is the building, the pink is land use, and the yellow is development engineering. And then we also included in these costs an allocation of support services expenses. So this would be finance department expenses that we would allocate towards the receiving, the billing, and those types of activities. And you can see the red line on this graph on the right-hand axis talks or shows what percentage that is of the direct costs. So those support services costs were roughly in the 25% of the direct cost range. And you can see on the little table at the far left there what that was in 2018 for each of the three different areas. So totaled roughly $64,500. You can see these expenses don't vary as much as the revenue side. That's partly because you've got staffing, so there's fixed costs associated with these activities, although you do have variable costs with your consultant planners, but there's more a series of fixed costs. So you can see 2018 is up, but not nearly as much as the on the revenue side or the permit side. So I mentioned that the revenues were just under 340,000 in 2018. Previewing some slides to come, you can see the 2018 numbers just about 340,000. So we just about matched the revenues and expenses in 2018, which is a good thing. So you can see the costs through June of 2019 are up quite a bit. So, but just about 250,000 through half of the year, on trend to come in at roughly 500,000. That's again a function of some of the staffing issues that you have and the activity level and where you are in some of the cycles. So we put the revenues and expenses together. And this is the net revenue. So positive numbers mean there were more revenues than expenses. Negative numbers mean there were more expenses than revenues. And you can see a significant number of numbers below the line there in 2016, 17, and 18. 99,506 for the building side, net positive revenue. On the land use side, pretty much the opposite, 105,000 roughly of loss, if you will, negative net revenue in 2018. But on balance, $5,400 of negative net revenue in 2018. 2019, these numbers obviously will change with the full year, especially with the 39 building permits in the third quarter of 2019. I expect all those numbers, I expect the building permit number to be significantly positive for you by the end of this year, and it should bring that green bar up, which is the overall net revenue, up to or above zero as well. So on a cost recovery percentage basis, we just look at this, and I've got a number of different bars here. Let me walk you through this. So each of the bars represents a different year, and each of the columns represents a different category of permit type. So the building full cost, that includes all of the support services as well. You can see it's been above 100% cost recovery for each of the 4 years that we're looking at, with the highest in 2018 with that 53 single-family building permits. If we take out the support services costs and look at just the direct costs, those cost recovery numbers go well above 100% and over 200% in 2018. On the land use side, a little bit different story. So as I mentioned before, it's not unusual to have cost recovery well below 100%. In fact, do this same kind of project for the City of Vancouver, and their target is 55% roughly for their land use permit services. Not too far off from where you are in your full cost recovery for your land use side. If you take away the support services, that rises to the 60 to 70% range. All in, you're at 98% in 2018. So far in 2019, you're at 77%. I would expect that to creep up potentially above 100%. And again, if you look at just the direct costs, close to 100% cost recovery, well over that in 2018. So overall, I'd say this is a positive story in terms of your overall cost recovery. You're not excessively over 100% overall, and you're not leaving a whole lot of money on the table in terms of the building permit side. So transition to the permit fee comparisons, and as I mentioned before, this benefits from some survey work that I did for other jurisdictions in 2018, and we added the center's information to the mix here. And what we tried to do in this work is come up with all of the fees that would go towards a project like this. So we created a sample project and asked each of the jurisdictions to tell us all the fees that would apply. So it's not just a building permit, it could be a right-of-way, it could be a water meter, those types of fees for example, with a building permit. And you can see I've got all the jurisdictions. So I've got Battleground, Camas, Clark County, Vancouver, Washougal, and then the average. What I look at this and say you don't want to be either really high or really low. So I bracket the right-hand column and walk through that. Your fee is $41.53. The average is $43.59. You're at 95% of the average. You were third out of the 6 jurisdictions, right in the middle in terms of your single-family building permit type. For this was I think a 2,000 square foot residence and a 500 square foot garage. Subdivision, again, what we tried to do is ask what are all the fees that would apply. So a SEPA fee, the subdivision fee, the critical areas review, all those things all in. Again, moving over to the far right, your land use fee would have been 82% of the average. So below the average, you're ranked 5th out of the 6, and your engineering fee was at 48% of the average at 6th out of 6. And just a comment from Tony is that he estimated his costs for using his time, not contracted out time. He suggested that if they used outside contractors to do some of the engineering review that he does, it would be potentially double his rate. So this is probably a beneficial look at La Center's rates, assuming that the internal staff are able to do those reviews. But even if it were doubled, it would be, on the engineering side, still be close to the average there. So that's a 15-acre, 80-lot subdivision. 2 other projects we looked at, a flex building, so a warehouse with a little bit of office, 35,000 square feet, and then a retail building. And again, moving all the way over to the right, you can see you're neither high or low, with the exception of the building permit fee for the 35,000 square foot building. There is some tendency for large value projects for your building permit to be a little bit on the high end compared to the other jurisdictions for when you start to get up to a large value of projects, and it's primarily the way that your building permit fee ladder works. It might be something to look at, or to put some jurisdictions that put a cap on their high end of their commercial building permit fees for to address some of these same kinds of issues. But again, all in, your fees are right. You're looking at 3s, 6 for the engineering again in both of these categories, but overall 3s and 4s. So your building permit fees here are very comparable to the other jurisdictions.
Paul, may I ask a question? Were you able to get any numbers from Ridgefield?
I've got some in just a minute.
Okay.
I will show you those. In fact, well, actually not this one. This one looks at Oregon. So the Oregon Building Officials Association does an annual permit fee survey for all of their jurisdictions. It includes Vancouver, and I have Washougal's as well. So just added La Center's in here, and you can see where you stand. Again, same kind of story, higher than some, lower than others. Right about at the median, maybe a little bit above the median for the Portland area, or excuse me, these metro areas, 4 of 9 and 106% of the average. So I don't show it here, but I did collect data for Ridgefield, Kalama, and La Center based on, and Woodland. You were $20 to $30 higher than Ridgefield and Kalama, and you were well below Woodland. Woodland was an outlier here. They were over $4,000. So very comparable, like again, within $30 is less than 1% of the fee. Also looking at the land use side, we did look at Ridgefield, Woodland, Kalama, and Washougal for these. And again, going over to the right-hand side, the average fee, and you can compare that to your fee with some of these standard, the more typical land use permit application fees that you have. So I would say the pre-application conference, you're at 35% for your $200 fee. You're probably at 75% on your subdivision fee. But that's a pretty low number. When you get below, get that low. Other ones that I would point out, the short plat, also at 43%. Your subdivision final plat at 38%. Maybe some opportunity there to increase your fees, develop a little bit more revenue. Remembering that your number of transactions at these is very, very low, so you're not going to throw a lot of revenue. You may want to keep your fees as is until there's other issues. And then did look at the subdivision preliminary plat. A lot of jurisdictions have a two-tiered. There's a base fee and then a per lot fee. And then down at the bottom, I run it what it would be for a 50-lot and 100-lot subdivision. And this shows that your subdivision fee, standalone subdivision fee, would be on the high end compared to these. So you're at 128% for 50 lots, 148% for 100-lot subdivision. So a little bit at the high end compared to Ridgefield, Woodland, Kalama, and Washougal. In fact, you're the highest of that comparable group. Maybe something to consider, and there could be easily done with either a change in the per lot fee. Or you can see what Ridgefield does is they don't charge their per lot fee until you get over 50 lots. So there's some tools that you have to potentially change that fee structure. Okay. Another area where you look like a little bit of an outlier is you charge a 10% administrative fee on the reimbursement of outside consultant services. And I did a little bit more digging, and it looks like this has been applied sort of two different ways in the past. Sometimes that 10% gets applied just to the internal staff costs, and sometimes it gets applied to the staff costs and the pass-through costs. And it may be just my misunderstanding. I know Eric Eisman's costs are sometimes considered internal, whereas a transportation study or some other outside consultant wouldn't be. But in any event, that 10% can add up for a lot of the larger projects, can be a fairly significant number. Ridgefield faced this same structure several years ago and went to a flat $30 per invoice. Essentially, it helps you recover the administrative costs of processing the invoice and the subsequent payment. And then Washougal and Woodland don't have an administrative charge, although when I asked Woodland if they had one, they said no, but we are thinking about it now that you asked it. So I think they're going to put one in. So that's another area to look at. So just to wrap up, some observations and recommendations. Again, cost recovery is near 100%, especially when you have higher new single-family resident volumes. Building permit cost recovery at or above 100%, that's can be pretty typical. It helps you cover some of those non-recovering services that you provide on the land use side as well as throughout your community development department. Land use and engineering at or below 100%. Again, this issue of tracking your financial activity, essentially translating or making that connection between your general ledger financial system and your permit system, making sure that the fee structure and that financial activity are connected. Your fees don't appear to be high or low in any regular pattern compared to the peer cities. High value building permits may be high. Large subdivision fees may be high. Some of your land use fees look like they're low, could be improved. Engineering fees may be low overall, depending on if they're internal or external review. You're charging cost recovery plus the permit fees. This is an issue we had in Ridgefield as well. So you collect a permit fee, and then you have a structural consultant do a fire life safety review, and then if it's a commercial building with any complexity, there's also an extra engineering, a structural engineering review that's done. And you pass those on to the applicant as opposed to using the fees that you collect to pay what would have been done by city staff if you had that expertise on hand. So there may be an opportunity for crediting a portion of the permit fee towards the outside consultant fees as well, to better represent what those costs are. And then again, the administrative fee on the invoices can be high when you get to some of those large projects. Your current fees aren't in your code appropriately, so reviewing and updating those fees and adopting a fee schedule annually is a recommendation. The code amendment would include specific references to building permit and development engineering fees. So you'd have a reference that says, look to the fee table or the fee schedule. That fee schedule should be updated regularly. And a lot of jurisdictions link their building permit valuation to the International Building Council IBC value table, which is published twice a year. So they automatically update their numbers. It allows you to keep your building permit fees somewhat inflation adjusted over time. You're currently at 110 per square foot is the valuation you're using for your building permits, your single-family building permits. The IBC for last August 2018 was 121. So you're a little bit lagging in terms of the valuation there. Your building permit valuation ladder, your value per square foot, references in your building permit fees, you need to document that. It's now in your system, but it's not anywhere else for anybody to see, and it should be part of your fee structure. As I mentioned, don't charge building permit fee and cost recovery for normal third-party building permit review, things that would typically be done by staff if you had that expertise on staff. Partial credit might be worth considering as well for subdivision and site plan review, cost recovery, and then that administrative invoice fee to a fixed number. Pre-application and short plat, so those are two that I call out. You may want to consider others in terms of fee increases. Lower that land use fee for larger subdivision, potentially again adjusting that per lot fee or making it applicable after a X number of lots. Suggest you add a development engineering base fee, so right now it's all 100% cost recovery. So if Tony doesn't spend any time on an applicant, there isn't any cost. Having a $50 or $1,000 fee provides some reimbursement for the information exchange, the time that it takes to exchange information before the application comes in. So he doesn't start tracking his time until the application comes in. Helps you recover some of that public assistance and information cost by having just a base fee, and it's not significant at all. And then again, improving the revenue and expense tracking, getting that permit system and your general ledger to align more closely. You have in the past, and I think you've stopped this practice, but you used to collect deposits up front and then you charge against those deposits. That also is problematic because that doesn't necessarily get aligned with a permit issuance number, and it becomes difficult in your general ledger because you're crediting the deposit and it's not necessarily able to track it. So again, some additional accounting improvements on that end would be helpful. More comments in the same vein, staff costs on the expense side. So I know the city engineer allocates a certain percentage of his time to the sewer fund. I would also suggest that you have staff identify the percentage of time that they spend in certain activities and start formally allocating those costs to those areas. Establish procedures for compiling, approving, issuing, collecting on applicant billing for cost reimbursement. Again, to strengthen those procedures. Cost recovery, review that annually. If you have the accounting done right, it shouldn't take much time to replicate this. If you don't do it annually, do it every other year. Be useful. And then my sort of financial CFO hat comes on here, and you want to make sure that you've got internal controls appropriately established. You've got small staff. You just have to be conscious of who's taking the money, who's putting it in the system, and then who's sending out the invoice. You got to be careful with those things. Okay. So that's it. I think overall, a very positive review in terms of the cost recovery. I think I had a hypothesis that suggested you might not be doing as well, but definitely, I think given your fixed costs, when the volume picks up, the cost recovery improves. I also expected your fees to be a little bit on the high end, I thought, but they turned out to be sort of right in the middle for the most part. So I think a very favorable review. I think hopefully there's a couple of recommendations that you can take going forward to improve things even further in the future. So I do want to thank staff. Sarah Dollar has been very helpful at pulling together information. Janice Fowler and Finance also very helpful in pulling information out of the financial system. So, questions?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a lot of numbers.
A lot of numbers.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great report. Thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So that concludes our meeting for this evening. Could I get a motion to adjourn?
Can I ask a question about this first?
Absolutely.
What are we going to do with this information?
We are going to review it and implement and take some of the, what are we going to do with this, Dustin?
There's definitely some recommendation in there that we want to implement, and a few that we've already moved forward with, including the collection of deposits that's no longer a process for the city, and some other items that we would like to adopt.
I just want to make sure that we did get a nice report and it's going to go in the second slot in an in-bin someplace.
I assure you that's not going to happen.
Okay,
Yes,
okay, that's
we will.
fine. So staff is working on restructuring and looking at the suggestions from Paul.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's fine. That's what I wanted. And that being said, I move to adjourn.
A second?
Moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for attending the meeting this evening, everyone.
That's a sneaky way to get good.